36
How come I just
videotape, which we have done.
Well, now do families buy these?
Probably too close.
Well, we because we're doing it, we'll see that you get one. And then we make one temporary, so that 20, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, we hope that they'll be able to have it. Then we'll have fancy relics from Syracuse. We've got old farm equipment that they used during the 20s and 30s. And Don and I are starting to write the book.
Okay. All right. Tell us who you are and go ahead. We're ready.
I'm Rhonda Walker Bonhams. I was born in East Garland, Utah, October the 3rd, 1904.
Your parents.
My father was Frank Lester Walker, and mother was Evelyn Elmira Miller Walker. And they married when they were in Syracuse and later moved up to East Garland, where my father was in farming. He did farming there and raising livestock. And then when I was about 5 years old, we moved to Logan, where the older children could have the advantage of high school. Father kept the farm. He worked the farm, but the family, our home was in Logan for 1 year. But the next year, Father contracted typhoid fever and passed away. And then we moved back. Mother moved the family back to the farm in East Garland. And then with a family of girls, 1 son and 6 girls, it was a little difficult for her to manage the farm. So she moved the family down to Syracuse to be near her parents and many relatives that she had there.
Okay, could we just ask you a question before we leave your father? He was a walker, as you were a walker. How did he tie into the Walker families here in Syracuse?
His father was James John Walker, who his parents came from England. His mother came from England, joined the church and came to Utah, and then grandfather Walker and his mother they joined the church in England, and they came to join the people in Utah. And while crossing the plains, my grandmother, great-grandmother, died and was buried 300 miles from Salt Lake City. My grandfather came on, of course, to Utah, and then he had a first wife, they had a family, and then my grandmother came from England and they met and they were married, and they had, I don't recall right at this very point how many children they had, but they raised a family. But mother was left a widow. We did have...
Do you remember where James John Walker lived? Did he live down someplace where William Beezer lived?
I think he lived in that area, but I never did know that. That's where he lived.
Okay, I can research that out.
Could you research that?
Yeah.
Should I tell about when our home buried? Would you like to hear that?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
After about a year, I guess it was, or a little more than that. I would have been probably 8 years of age by then. It was just a few days before Christmas, and it was winter. There was snow on the ground, and early in the morning, I got up to make the fire, and then it was so cold that she went back to bed, and until the room warmed up. And then in a few minutes, my mother heard this roaring sound. It was concerned her. She got out of bed immediately, went out into the room where the stove was, and the room was all ablaze with fire. It was just too late to get any help. And she just hurried to get the children out of the house. And we went out in our bare feet. It was semi-darkness time, but we went across the street toward Uncle Joe Walker's home. And it was a most heartbreaking time for us.
Where would this home have been?
That was in Syracuse. Do you remember where Uncle Homer Walker lived and Uncle Joe? We lived across the street from there. And by Uncle Dan Walker. Remember the Dan Walker home?
Where Ralph and Jetta and those lived.
Well, our home was just across this angle, and then Uncle Joe and Uncle Homer both had lived in this home. And so we went, but Uncle Joe was living there at the time, and they took us in and fixed up one of the rooms for us. And but our home, everything burned completely to the ground. Piano was the very last thing to stand, but we watched in the window and saw the roof falling in and our furniture one by one. But
How long was this after you came to Syracuse?
Well,
or came back to Syracuse?
I don't have any way of getting the date of the fire, but it was either less than a year. We moved to Syracuse in time for school, or the next year. It possibly was the next year, maybe 15 months. And
How old was you when the fire occurred?
I would have been about, let's see, your father died just before I was 6 when he lived here. I was about 8 years old. It was the first year, I guess, that I knew about Santa Claus. And I knew that my last doll was in the home somewhere. And I knew, of course, when the fire came, that this doll I was going to get was burned in the fire. And being little, that was, it made me, I felt badly. But the thing was, to be homeless. We already had lost Father. And then to have our home burned. But Mother was wonderful. She really was an exceptional lady. She just helped us in that little room that Uncle Joe wasn't a small room. Uncle Joe, we were comfortable. And then she just made us a very happy home. We had a wonderful influence and spirit in our home. We all look back at that home. It was humble, but it sure had a happy spirit and influence there. And she just kept us happy. I mean, it was hard. And then she took in dressmaking to help support the family. And we all went, as soon as we were old enough to work, we'd each take our turn, we'd work, and then whatever we made, we'd give to Mother. And then she would distribute it how we needed. And so we never had friction in the home. It was just a lot of love. One of the brothers, remember Clarence Smedley? Mm-hmm. He was the ward clerk I think it was ward clerk. I remember him telling me when I was about 14 years of age that he said, your mother's people are people that have a lot of love. And they did have. And that's one, we had to go through some hardships, but we had that love and that warmth and the testimony of the gospel. Mother was strong and we all were active. And I filled 2 missions and so we were very richly blessed in so many ways.
Could you repeat the name of your sisters from the oldest down?
Well, there was Aurelia, Irva, Maud, Rhoda, myself, and Ruth and Thelma. Brother Bill moved to Ogden and was married, so he never did live with us in Syracuse. But Mother and Father lost 3 sons. One 2 months, 2 years, and 12 years that I have yet to meet. They died before I was born. So I have them yet. I'm looking forward to meeting them someday. But we grew up in a happy home, and I'll always loved Syracuse. There were such good people there, and it was a happy life. I mean, we had quite a few relatives. And after the fire, people were so good. Everything we needed just was brought there. And someone brought me a doll. It was a second-hand doll. but I had a doll for Christmas. And how they came, you know, how they helped each other. It was just beautiful how they helped us. No wonder we have happy memories.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school there, in high school, and then I had to help work. I couldn't go on to college with my friends, but I worked in the lower store. I clerked and ran that little lower store for several years until I went to Ogden finally, and then my sister Ruth took over at the lower store. She worked there. And I worked in Ogden for about a year, and then I was married.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Lower Walker store, how it was arranged, and what they sold, or a little bit about
Well,
Where it came from?
well, it was just a branch of the larger mercantile store up in heart of Syracuse.
But it was the first store for the Walker brothers.
Well, different people had interest. Grandfather Miller had some interest in that store. But it was the Walker, Uncle Dan Walker operated this store, the main store. But down, we had we had some yard goods and some clothing, gloves, and we sold all kind of, you know, food supplies, cheese. It was just a regular country store. And it was quite interesting. People come in, you know, and get to know them and visit with them. And then there was time in between that you could do handwork, or you could, the first time I read the Book of Mormon was while I was working in this country store. In those days, people would bring eggs in, you know, and trade the eggs for merchandise. We'd have to candle each of the eggs. And ice, we used had a regular, those wooden ice boxes, you know. And that was, of course, we were all used to those things in that day. It was a different day, but I sometimes wish some of the things about those years I like better than the things we have today. It was a happier, free, you know, the world wasn't quite so wicked. And the different neighboring wards, they were friendly. I used to enjoy dancing a lot. We'd go to different wards, you know, to Clearfield and West Point, Hooper, and just a nice crowd of young people. I used to give readings in those different wards, and I always was active in some position in the ward, which I appreciated. I think that it's a privilege. And it's a way that we can become educated in important ways when we serve. It isn't like you just go to school, you know, to learn one thing, but to give your time and work with the people, I really enjoyed mine. When I look back, I think often of Syracuse, and I think of the home I grew up in and the dear girlfriends and friends that I had there. I feel it was one of the, well, best places in the world. And then, see, we had roots down there with my great-grandparents, my grandparents and all, and so many relatives. That, no wonder I think about it often.
Before we talked about Grandpa, you mentioned you went to school. Tell us a little bit about that, and especially the North Davis High School.
Oh, yes.
And if you were active in, you said you liked drama and things like that. Were you in some of the plays? And
Well, in
name
high
some of
school,
those.
I see. Well, we had to walk to high school, and it was, we about half a, well, we, it was, I guess, close to a mile that we would have walked, maybe less. But it was so fun walking with our girlfriends. Sometimes we'd get laughing so hard we'd sit down there and look at them. Life was joyous. And then, but we just had our principal and then a lady teacher. And there was...
Do you remember their name?
Oh, Miss Paulson was the lady. Oh, and our principal... I should remember his name. I'm right offhand. Oh, it was Nelson. I think Nelson. Wasn't he a principal there at the high school?
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Nelson. Oh yes, I took the lead in a high school operetta, and I used to take part in the other. Nearly every year, we would have an operetta. The years I worked there, or some kind of a play. I used to take part in the plays, but I did give a lot of readings. At 15, when I was 15 years of age, I was asked to give a reading in Syracuse. I remember that well, and it kind of frightened me. I was just starting to do that. And then from there out, I was called to the different wards in our stake around in that area. And I remember one 4th of July, do you remember those wonderful 4th of July we used to have? They would generally get an orator from the east somewhere to speak on the program. And they really, in that we had a grove of trees between the church house and the cultural hall. And the people would come early. They had benches around through here, and it was quite grassy. And they'd bring their food, a basket of food, and they'd put it on their table, you know. So, and they'd select the tables that way. Then we would have this program. And this one year, I was asked to give a reading on the program, and I thought that was kind of an honor. And they had an orator, and I don't recall his name, but he was from New York City. And after the program, he said he would like to meet me. And so I was introduced to him, and he said, I think you ought to go on with your reading. You ought to come to New York and specialize and go on, you know, in this field. Well, I did. I knew Mother would never agree to that. I didn't even want to. But I remember that because I was so surprised. I was just a country girl, and, you know, that opportunity. But nevertheless, I didn't have the desire, and I knew Mother wouldn't approve, so nothing came of it. But we were busy people. We used to have to carry, and we didn't have the furnaces, the electric stoves and heat. We used to, I remember filling the coal bucket and bringing it in. We'd chop wood, you know, to start our fires. Carry, we didn't have water. Never did Mother, I don't think, ever have running water in the home. Of course, she died quite young. Mother died. Father died when I was nearly 6, and Mother passed away when I was 31. But we just took it for granted, you know. And when we had to carry our bath water heated on coal stove. But we were really happy people.
What year did your mother pass away?
What year?
Yes.
Well, she was 31. I was 31 when she passed away. Oh,
That'd be about 1936.
she was 60. She was 60. Oh, let's see, and my third boy, baby, was 5 months old, and he was born in 1931. He was born in 1931. And well, I hadn't been married very long, so it's been around that time. I would have to go and look up my records to find out exactly. I've been so busy, and we've moved a lot.
Do you have a daughter named Barbara?
Surely do.
Barbara Mitchell.
Barbara?
Is she a Mitchell now?
Oh, no, she married Smith, Doug Smith.
Smith.
She lives in Idaho Falls. Her husband is bishop for the 2nd time in the same ward.
Yeah, I grew up with a Barbara Bonham.
Oh, she went to high school, you know.
Yeah, but
Oh, there was another Barbara Bonham.
she was related to...
From Clinton.
From Clinton.
She was related to my husband.
She was related some way to the Audrey Miller and those.
That's right, but it's on the Bonham side.
But maybe it was, okay.
That's right.
Okay, I'm sorry it just got...
No, let's see. So I had, you know, I was without parents at an early age.
What other activities did they do on the 4th of July there besides the program?
Well, of course I remember one thing, in the ward they had built this little chute, you know. Do you remember? Well, you probably weren't even born. But they built, one of these little narrow slides that you go down, the metal, and it wasn't quite as easy to take as the ones you have at Lagoon. But we had a really lot of fun. That you go up a ladder, and then slide down. And they had
football races, or I should say foot races.
Yes, they used to have things like that. I remember the first time that I ever rode in an automobile. It was during these times when we were having our spending our 4th or 24th there at the Grove, as we called it. And Fred Walker, who was distantly related to me, he was Uncle James Walker's in that family. But he had an automobile, and we had never ridden in one. I was just a little girl. And so we paid either 5 or 10 cents a ride to ride down about where Uncle Arnold Miller used to live and back. And that was where I had my first automobile at that time. But people would just have a lot of just enjoyment visiting. But oh yes, they did have games. They'd have some kind of games, and oh yes, they did. Even running races. It's all coming back. But
how about the baseball games they had right there?
Oh, they used to. Yes, that was right close to the, where they played ball. There was and then there was a strip between the cultural hall, and then you'd go up in north, into this field, and they played ball up there. Remember that? And then
Eli Cooper had a stallion horse pen over there, and they used to try to knock home runs into his horse pen. You ever heard that, Don?
Well, our home was right next to that at that time when I was a little girl. But Uncle Homer Walker, he had a barber shop and a place where they sold confection.
Just across the street. They gave haircuts.
But our house was at that time was the first house east of that where they played baseball and had that field. But there are other houses there now, and
Eli Cooper probably moved into that after you left.
Yes, I wanted to go back and go through that house. But of course, that was impossible.
That be the one next to the Wooden House? The one just
It might
east-
be
east
that,
of
or the
Floyd House?
one behind Todd Barber's.
Was it a small home or near the road? What size home?
Well, it was a 2-bedroom home, and then Mother had a kitchen and a porch screen porch built on it.
Was this built after the fire again?
Oh yes, And
Same
we lived
place.
in the house. They just built on the same foundation, exactly the same foundation. And then Mother had a cellar built. She had a kitchen built on, and then a stairway leading down so that we had a cement floor in this cellar, and shelves for fruit. It was quite a good addition. And then, even after that, she had a screen porch built on where, even a bed where we could sleep, in the summertime at least.
Well, we got you away from, let's get you back into the amusement hall. What's some of the things you remember about what happened in the amusement hall?
Oh my goodness, we used to have ward bazaars that were just once a year. And on the east side of the cultural hall, there would be the different booths, and they'd demonstrate things they'd made, quilts and all that. And they'd have good food, and we'd go up one door to the stage. You probably don't remember the stage, but we would go up a few steps, and they would have tables along it, serving all this good food. And we'd just take our plates and come down, and then there was a doorway and steps coming down on the other side. And then, we'd have dances they'd have Virginia reels, they'd have dances for the young people and for the older people. And we just had a ball. Everybody really participated in the dances, and it was fun. And
They have a scout band?
oh, that scout band was one. Now, Eli Rentmaster, he was the one that organized this band with those young men. I wish I knew how many. There was quite a large group. Would you know
We have their picture, I can't remember how many
21,
now.
wasn't it?
20
But-
years.
William Miller was in it, and Dale Cook, and
William Miller's my cousin.
yeah.
Oh, I remember Dale Cook. But we were proud of that band. And Uncle George Rampton used to give readings, and he was really quite a comic.
You call him Uncle, how?
Well, he was a half uncle. See, his mother was a Walker. My father's half sister.
Okay.
Aunt Em was father's half sister. So, and then of course, Uncle Dan was just he was my full uncle. Ivy and
George Rampton giving readings, I can't imagine
Never heard
that.
that before.
George, oh, he was so comical. He was just really a comic. Everybody loved to hear him reading. And let's see, what else happened in that dear old town of mine?
He was a blacksmith too, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. Going to to school, we passed.
Do you remember anything of what it looked like?
Well, I can recall in my mind going in. It was on the east side of the street, and it was quite an open space, so you could just walk in, you know, from the sidewalk. And I remember we stopped there, the girls, sometimes my little girlfriends and I, and watch him. He'd have a blaze there in this stand thing that he'd have to heat, you know, in this process. And sometimes we even watched him shoot a horse while we waited there.
We took you away from the scout band. Do you recall that one incident?
Oh, it nearly broke our hearts. The band was up on the stage there in our cultural hall at Syracuse, and they just played beautifully together. And we were really, the people were proud of them. It was a very lovely thing for our community. And then something happened. I don't recall how it started because we were quite surprised. But all of a sudden there was some trouble came up and a friction, and they did, really, we were just sick at heart.
Playing off tune, weren't they?
Wait, pardon?
Playing off tune?
Oh, was that? I can't recall. They might have been playing off tune, but they finally decided they were going, Eli, I guess, we'll just disband. We'll disband. We'll break up this band, and this is the end of it. We were sick. I'll never forget it. And then they let us know it was just a joke. Well, they sure didn't pull that one off really good, because we really thought that was going to be the very end of our band. But we were so relieved. I don't know, we just had fun in Syracuse, so wholesome, and just good friends there.
Remember the silent movies they held there?
Yes.
Culture Hall?
Oh, I do. We were so excited about having the movies come. Yes, I do recall. That was when they were first starting there. And we thought they were great, but you know, once in a while on TV they show them, a lot of them now. And quite different, isn't it? With our color and all the modern way they have now, these pictures. But they, I think they had good management there. It seemed like we, good people to lead, and it was always organized well, and we felt like a family, at least I did. I remember sitting in sacrament meeting with my girlfriends, and I remember some of the older men that bore their testimonies, and it was just a very ideal place to grow up. I wish I have 65 great-grandchildren, 64 living. I wish they could all grow up in Syracuse like it was. I feel blessed for having I'm thankful for my pioneer ancestors and what they went through to come to Utah and Nauvoo. One great-grandfather and great-grandmother Miller had to leave their home and their furnishings. Just when they were burning, the mobs were burning homes, they left their homes with the furniture. And another set of great-grandparents had to leave their home. And but they didn't give up. And they seemed to have the courage, determination, and the faith to go on. And I'm really thankful for them. I really feel I owe them a lot.
Tell us all you can about your grandfather and grandmother Miller.
Oh, great grandfather and grandmother Miller just kept that lovely home. It was just a joy to me. And then later, after grandmother passed away, Uncle Arnold and Aunt Lily Miller came and took over the fruit farm and the place. And of course they had their daughter Louise, who was about my age. I stayed there a lot with Louise. It was just a paradise for children to play in the orchards and the flowing well and the bird's nest. I know we used to look in the bird's nest in the orchard, trees in the orchard.
What kind of fruit trees did he grow?
Apples.
Apples?
They were the W.H. Miller and Sons were the first to ship fruit commercially from the state of Utah. I remember the place where they make the boxes. They would assemble the boxes, the bushel boxes, but they would have printed on the end of that. I can see it in my memory now. W.H. Miller and Sons, black, but printed in black on the end of the boxes. And we had more fun going in there when they weren't busy. Louise and I, they had nails and hammers, and it was such a fun place to live. Oh, I wanted to read you something. When Grandpa saw Grandma, I don't know, he just loved her so much. And they had love in their home. Just to go and stay in Grandma and Grandpa's home and be there was, I just enjoyed it so much. And it's a picture of Mother and her sisters and Grandma Miller and the family. And this is a picture of the home. But Grandpa wrote the dearest, here is the picture of them. And he wrote this to Grandmother. Below, this is an acrostic written by my grandfather, William Henry Miller, to Grandmother Helen Miller, shortly before they were married. My heart was pure and true to me, ever loving and ever kind to me. Love was pictured in every move, loving she was, and she ever strove ever to be pleasant when I was with her. Never can I forget her, though she should turn away. There is a girl, and then he said, there is a girl in the West, a flower she is, as gay as the rose. She is sweeter than all the rest. I love her, and I'll have her, by Jove. And so where they had that love for each other, see, we felt that in home. And Mother's brothers and sisters, Uncle Arnold was so near, and Uncle Dear and Uncle Seymour, I had a chance to know them. And they were all loving people. And it was a sweet, very lovely period. I used to tell my two youngest children a lot about playing there and what we did down at the Grandpa Miller's fruit farm. And so when they were just, sometimes they'd say, well, Mama, tell us about down at Grandpa Miller's, what you did at Grandpa Miller's farm. They won't hear about it when I was a little girl, and I used to go down to that place. Very happy about it. Mm-hmm. And they kept those trees, everything was in such order. When I think of it now, they're they're quite close by the house, and then they would have these furrows running down between the rows of trees, and water. I remember Louise and I used to run down through this orchard. They would water that, but they were so free of weeds. In my mind's eye, it was just perfectly kept. And the mourning doves, you'd always hear mourning doves there. And Louise and I used to, nearly every tree, it seemed like would have a mourning dove nest, and we used to go and visit them. Sometimes we'd take the little birds and throw them up in the air. We thought we were teaching them to fly. But it was a delightful place for children. It just gave us beautiful memories. But they were surely stalwart people, weren't they, in those days?
She was the first primary president in Syracuse, I believe, wasn't she?
My grandmother.
Grandmother.
And mother was an organist. She played the organ. Yeah. And she helped Aurelia S. Rogers planning the very first primary of the church. They were very dear friends. And Aurelia S. Rogers wanted to be her counselor, but grandmother's health was not too good. She didn't accept that. They had at least 12 children, Grandma and Grandpa Miller. They had a large family. But she helped plan that first primary of the church. I don't know. Then Mother had been president of the primary, and pregnant young lady, she was active, even though she took in dressmaking and all. She always was active in the church. She worked in the state primary she worked on the state primary board for 11 years up to the time of her death.
How big would the stake be at that time? Kaysville North? The stake?
Well,
Was there just 2 stakes in
it
Davis
was just
County?
one stake then.
In Davis County. Bountiful on, huh?
Well, what I mean, there was just we didn't have Bountiful, just Kaysville. You remember there was Governor Blood was a state president.
The steakhouse was over there in Kaysville.
Mm-hmm. Our choir, you sang there a few times. I remember sang in the choir there and the Nalders were other people that a dear family that I was closely associated with. Their daughter Minnie and I were very dear girlfriends. And
This is Bishop Frank Nolder?
yes, Bishop Frank Nolder.
Was he bishop when you were
Yes,
growing up?
some of the time. And then he was, they moved to California, and he was a patriarch when they moved to California. And his Minnie still lives there. She's, I think, the only surviving one of the children. In fact, she was here this summer. She and Portia came to Salt Lake, and Minnie was there, and Ivy.
I understand you all get together.
Yeah, we had lunch together. And Minnie stayed overnight with me. But they were such dear, special young ladies. And then my cousins Ivy and Ruth Walker, they were very dear friends too. We were all in the same crowd. And Louise Miller, Bessie Smith. You remember Bessie Smith? She
Married O.B. Anderson?
O.B. Anderson.
She still plays
I received
piano?
a Christmas card from.
You still play?
I used to give readings, but I didn't. I just played the violin some. And my cousin Ruth Walker and I played some. But when I was in my Florida mission, I was very surprised to be called the Florida mission when I was 67. I had been secretary of the Sunday school for 5 years, and they were considering changing me into they were going to transfer me over to working with the young ladies in Sunday school. They talked about it, and so this one morning, I was sitting there at my desk ready to, Sunday school to get on the stand. As he walked by my desk, he said, "Sister Bonham, I would like to meet you in my office after we separate for classes." And I thought, well, they're going to transfer me into with the young ladies. And so I went in his office and sat there. He hadn't come in yet from his duties, but he walked in and instead of going to his desk, he sat down on the chair beside me, and with a big smile on his face, he turned and looked up at my face. He said, "Sister Bonham, have you ever considered going on a mission?" I actually gulped. I was so surprised. I said, "Well, I had always wanted to go, but I thought I was too old." He said, No, you're not too old." And I soon received a call to go to the Florida mission. And then about 2.5, maybe 3 years later, I was called to go on another mission. But a state president at that time, my age, I didn't know. And I discussed it with the state president. He said, "Well, should we put short term for this one?" And I said, "Maybe we better." And he said, No, I'll put a filter and you see, because, you know, if it is, doesn't work out okay. Because by then I was 70. But I was still not 70. I was still really busy doing things. But anyway, I had a problem with my knee, and I had to come home medical. And then later, when after it was improving and seemed quite normal, I was told to go and talk to one of the brethren about going back, and in the mission field, and he said, it was Elder Dilworth Young. He said, no, I don't think so. He said, I don't approve of lady missionaries that age. He said, I think that you should have an honorable discharge. And my daughter needed me so badly, I thought, what was I doing? My first mission was Florida, the second one was Tennessee. What was I doing when she needed me? So it was all for the best. Things, if you're trying to do what's right, it'll work out for you. Mm-hmm. I found that out. And I was trying to. I was doing what they asked me to do. But my daughter needed me so much. But I still had a hand in some conversions. Mm-hmm. It's just wonderful when you teach, you know, the gospel and see them convert. This picture on the wall, that beautiful needlepoint, it was a wonderful convert in Florida, a lady. She was several years older than I am. But when I saw that lady, it was very unusual circumstances that led us to her. Very unusual. We were led there. She was a widow, very high-type lady, working out in her flower garden. But we had to call on her, and my companion and I, and introduced ourselves. She was high up in the Eastern Star. If that's sort of a religion, I suppose. I'm not well acquainted with it. But we told her we were, and we'd like to give her discussions, tell her about the church, and so we set an appointment with her. And she was very interested. And we had 6 discussions in the Florida mission. During the fourth discussion, as we were giving to her, I knew that she had received the testament. I felt it. And but we were to give her the 6 regardless. But she was ready for baptism. And then when I was released, she came with me to Salt Lake. After I came home, she came to Salt Lake to go to the temple, and I had the privilege of going through the temple with her, and for her to receive her endowments. And after she went home, she made this beautiful needlepoint for me, and I had it framed. And I kept in touch with her. And she was put in a nursing home about a year ago. And the lady in charge, I said, you let me know, because she was in her early 90s. I want to know when Frances passes away, because she wasn't able herself to write to me. Mm-hmm. I could talk to her on the phone. And so I received word that she passed away. And she was 93 years of age. But I did talk to her on the phone, not long before her death. And I said, Frances, are you still strong in the church? And she said, yes, I am. I said, you be sure that they bury you in your temple clothes. Honey, she said, they're all laid out ready. And so I have this beautiful needlepoint, this handwork of hers to remember her by. She was a very choice lady. Missionary work is so rewarding. People you meet, and it's been a very rich experience.
You know where your grandfather Miller, he shipped out. I think we have records he shipped as far as Chicago, maybe further. But where did he keep the apples for the winter?
Oh, they had a regular building was like a big shed, really, for storing fruit, and it was lined inside with a metal sheet, but kind of like tin. It was dark in there and cool. I know Louise, my cousin and I used to go in there once in a while, but it would keep really well there. And,
Is that by where the packing house was?
Well,
In that same area?
Maybe that was called the packing house. I don't know. But back of the house is they had a shed back of the house, and then there was a lawn. They had 2 swings there in honeysuckle where we used to swing, and then they had where they put the boxes together. But then across, like a driveway, you might say, was this big building, and I know it had the door of it had inside was quite thick, and it was like quite heavy sheet of tin or something on there.
Seemed like it had white.
But
And then they put stuff in it like sawdust or something.
Robbie was telling us or showing us.
but as I remember, it's kind of dark in there and cool, always cool, and that preserved the fruit, during the time that they needed to protect it or keep ready for shipping.
Then they'd send box cars out.
They'd send that in boxcar loads of fruit.
There's old pear trees still alive down there. Did he grow pears?
Oh yes, he had them. I remember they had the water pipe so close to the house, and a pump in the kitchen. They had a sink, and they had a pump. You could pump the water at the sink. But outside, not far from the back porch, they had a little tap you could turn on and running water. But then they had, you go from the house, they had a picket fence around where the house was enclosed. And then they used to have the tying post. People had their horse and buggies in those days. Quite a tying post outside this one fence where people, they come in, could tie up their horses. And then there was like a roadway down between where they made the boxes and this big storage place. But they had a flowing wheel there. Oh, a big, long kind of trough thing, about so long, and maybe this wide. And underneath the one end, at least, they had a door where they could store butter and keep butter in there. And then the other was a trough where just mossy inside, where the horses could drink. And then they had a few fruit trees there, and they had the pear tree there, and they used to have grapes. I remember that porch on Grandfather's house. On Sundays, the neighbors and relatives would come in their wagons or buggies or whatever, and the older folks would sit on the porch or the steps or the lawn. And Grandpa, I remember him sending it. It had milk in big pans then, and they'd skim that cream off and make butter out of it. And so they had quite a few milk pans, and he'd send somebody one of these pans, go down and pick grapes. So they'd come with a pan full of delicious grapes, and the folks would eat grapes while they're there, or fruit. Sometimes it was pears. I remember sometimes they would bring pears for them to eat while they were just sitting there visiting. It was a delightful place. Life was lovely. It really was beautiful. And happy. I don't recall, there must be I can't help but think there would be some, I don't know, maybe differences, but I never remember of any kind of friction amongst, of any kind. Little children sometimes would notice it, but I don't recall anything, and I spent quite a lot of time there with Louise. But I do remember, I was always rather shy. I do remember this about being left there once when the folks were we were living in East Garland, and I don't know whether Grandma wanted me to stay or what, but I decided to stay. My folks went home. But in their kind of dining room, living room, they had this lounge with like this plush, how it kind of, what do they call those kind of lounges? Like a kind of pillow, but it just tapers on. I remember curling up on there. They did have a hired man, Grandpa Tree, we called him, and he used to remind me of this. But I remember I became homesick without my folks, even though I loved being there, and curling up on that couch, and to say, I want to go home. I want to go home. And I would keep saying that. And Grandpa Treehorn, even when I was a big girl, he used to kind of tease me about that, or, you know, remind me of how I got homesick. But it wasn't for any reason only that I, you know, missed my own parents. But they, Grandma, she was so refined. She grew up in a home of refinement. I remember they'd set this big table. They had 2 hired girls there for a while, sisters. And there'd be quite a few around this table. But Grandma had her silver napkin rings. It had the napkins that were there. And I remember it was a little squirrel deal with a little place to put the napkin through. It was a kind of silver-like. And that was by each plate. And it was done just so. She was a real lady. My grandmother, Helen Aurelia Hinman. Oh, by the way, great-grandmother Miller had the most exciting life. It was just tremendous. What the things he was involved with. He crossed the plains 7 times, 5 times as captain of companies. And when the missionaries first came to their home, great-grandfather wasn't at home. But my great-grandmother was, when the missionaries talked to her, she applied for baptism that very day. And the elders said, well, let's wait till your husband comes home and talk to, you know, teach him. And they were baptized real soon after that, both of them. But my great-grandmother Miller was given the gift of tongues and the gift of interpretation of tongues. She's a very spiritual lady. But when there came a time, I can't give you, Uncle Arnold Miller, there's an account he has given here. It's typewritten. But he, great-grandfather, they had moved into an area near Nauvoo, or had property close by there. But some of the people, they would come to this winter quarters, and they would need to buy oxen and supplies before they undertook the trip across the plains. But the people, see, they were so bitter about the Mormons, they wouldn't sell. The merchants wouldn't sell to the Mormons. But great-grandfather, he dressed up like, well, like a frontiersman, I guess. And he put a bowie knife, whatever they are, one side was built, and he had a gun in the other. And he took a flask of whiskey jug to treat them. And he was able to buy what they needed. They didn't know he was a Mormon, never found out he was a Mormon. But his life was very eventful. It's very interesting reading about the things that he did. He went through a lot, but he did a lot. And he and his brother Daniel were very close. Not only were their names Miller, but they were Miller by trade. And they had a mill. I know that grandfather, they had a mill in that, around Nauvoo, around that area, as I remember. He gave he was called to help on the building committee of the Nauvoo Temple, and he gave $3,000 towards the building of it. I remember that, reading that in Uncle Arnold's account. And he was asked by Brigham Young to stay at winter quarters and not go. His brother Daniel came to Farmington ahead of him, but Brigham Young advised great-grandfather to stay on there to help as the people would come in there and gather at winter quarters to, you know, get ready for the trek west, to help them, and ask him to build a tabernacle. He built a log tabernacle there in Nauvoo. And it was there where Brigham Young was officially set apart as a person of the church. And let me see, there was something else that seemed to me about that. But then when they came, they settled in Farmington. Oh, am I saying things I shouldn't?
No.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is something that's most interesting. So, my great-uncle Daniel Miller and my great-grandfather were buried in the Farmington Cemetery, and their wives there, Daniel's wife. And my great-grandfather Miller did take a second wife after he came to Utah. But my son David and I were considering going to Farmington to get a place. And I said, while we're here, David, let's go to the cemetery. I want to see the graves of my great-grandparents. So we looked them up, and oh, I was heartsick. They were so sunken. Even the lawn all around, it was just sunken down. And one of the tombstone, one was cracked, it was laying down, and it was just really, I was quite heartsick. And I made up my mind that something had to be done about that. And so, I have a niece, a granddaughter now, who's lived in Farmington. She and her husband have had a home built, and they're living in Farmington. And I was there visiting with them a few months ago. My daughter, Idaho Falls, and her husband, that's their daughter, and we were there visiting. And so I said to my granddaughter, Jill, I was telling them about how neglected these graves were, and something should be done. And I said, I want to call, here it won't be long distance, I want to find out who's in charge of the cemetery and see what we can have done about these graves. And so we couldn't locate. She said, Grandma, I'll find out for you. So, who we should contact about it. Mm-hmm. So she did, and she got in touch with people who make headstones. I think they're in Balfour. I'm sure they are. And so I thought, well, I'm going to contact my family, the close ones, and we're going to raise the money. And she found out, had him appraise what it would cost. And he said it would be $500. I thought, boy, I don't have much money, but if I have to go in debt, we're going to fix those graves up. But I knew I wouldn't have to, because the family would be happy to help. Mm-hmm. So William Miller, Bill Miller, mm-hmm. President Miller, well, he's passed away. I contacted his wife, and I contacted different ones, my own children, and so here came the money in, but I had to pay it all. Oh, but finally, the man said he could do it for $300. Mm-hmm. So that was I thought was really a bargain too. That was good of him. Mm-hmm. We didn't ask him to; he just did it. And so I paid it in full because I knew we had to take care of it, satisfy him, of course. And besides, I believe in that. And so then I started contacting. Here came different amounts of money in. And I telephoned a lot around, and then my sister Irva Tree's daughter helped me contact cousins and relatives.
Colleen?
Colleen Bronson, And so they came and they fixed it up. They said, but if you want it done, you need to do it soon before winter sets in. So they came. I haven't had a chance yet to see them. I just have to wait till spring now. Mm-hmm. But anyway, 2 days after they finished, it turned really cold and wintry. We had it done just in time. Mm-hmm. But they say it's a big improvement. And now, just this past week, I received $100 from another branch. It was one of my uncle's mother's brother's family. And we have a little to spare. So I suggested, well, I paid a little more than the rest, which I wanted. I didn't care. It's money well spent. But I thought, someone said, well, now you reimburse yourself. I said, if we have any over, one of the, Bill Miller's wife suggested that we all meet at the cemetery, Mm-hmm. But it was too cold, too late in the season. So I called her. I said, what do you think about next Memorial Day? And if we have money over, we'll buy flowers for the graves, and the ones who can and want to meet there. Mm-hmm. So if all goes well, that's our plans. Mm-hmm. But it's such a good feeling. But I found out since Mary Miller, Bill's wife, said that David and Bill had seen the graves there, and they felt badly, and they were hoping to do something about themselves. But then they died fairly young. They didn't get around to it. So I guess maybe others have had that in mind, but anyway, it's done.
Spirit of the Lord, you're working on,
Oh, it's a real thrill.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can hardly wait till spring. My oldest son, it turned wintry too and cold, mm-hmm. and he said next spring you'll have to ride up and see it. But others in the family have seen it, say it's greatly improved. Mm-hmm. And after all, the family's so important, isn't it? And
Yes. Well, we appreciate visiting with you and learning a little bit more about your ancestors, both the Walkers. Maybe when we shut this off, we could look at the pictures and the histories
Oh,
on that.
I have some grape. I want you to have some grape juice and cookies. Would you do that? I have some cold grape juice, Welch's grape juice. I didn't make the cookies. I don't bake anymore. I'm 86 years old. You knew that, didn't you?
No, I know, of course she is.
She and Ruth have their birthdays in June, and mine's in October.
Just
Maybe
Of course, she last night.
That's it.